Hello again. I'm bound to say that I'm not at all in favour of pulling down or otherwise removing old statues simply because they have some supposed connection with the transatlantic slave trade. The Welsh government has signalled full steam ahead on a project to decolonise their statues, by which they mean remove them, if they, and I quote, insult or hurt people, that is to say minorities, or do not project present values. This seems to me to be a licence to scrap any statues at all. However, for once I have some sympathy with an endeavour of this kind, and I must explain why. Just round the corner from here is a statue of the Duke of Wellington. You can see it in the thumbnail to this video. It is already in the sights of the decolonisers. I am bound to say, though, that I myself, when first I came across this statue, literally gasped in disbelief, and for a reason I shall explain. On the plinth of the statue of Wellington is an inscription which simply says Picton and gives his dates. He's shown on a bronze relief greeting Wellington and leading his men into battle at Waterloo, where he was killed. The idea of commemorating Thomas Picton publicly in this way is shocking to me, and I'll have to give a bit of a history lesson just to explain why. Thomas Picton was a career soldier who fought extensively around the world in the Napoleonic Wars. In the late 18th century, he commanded forces which attacked the Caribbean islands of St. Vincent and St. Lucia, and after their capture from Spain, he was appointed governor of Trinidad. He was, by the way, Welsh, which explains why he was added to the statue of Wellington. He was the only Welsh general at Waterloo. For the next 5 years after being put in charge of Trinidad, Picton ruled the island as though it were his own personal fiefdom, dealing out torture and execution at whim. He was later to be charged with 29 counts of death unlawfully inflicted, to use a legal phrase. These included hangings, beheadings, and burning men alive. Much of the torture concerned alleged cases of witchcraft, which Picton seemed to take very seriously. It should be noted that the facts of what happened while Thomas Picton governed Trinidad were never really in dispute. The whole affair boiled down to the legality or otherwise of his actions. The executions and tortures were, after all, not really remarkable when considered in the context of the general behaviour of the white rulers of the West Indies at that time. Even by prevailing standards, Picton's excesses were raising eyebrows in London by 1802, and it was decided that it might be wise to rein him in a bit. Instead of being sole governor of Trinidad, he would in future be just one of 3 commissioners. This did not suit the autocratic Picton, and he resigned, returning to London, where in 1803 he was arrested. Bail was set at the astoundingly high sum of £40,000, equivalent today to perhaps £3 million. And this was some indication of how seriously the offences were regarded by the establishment in London. To begin with, the various deaths were first dealt with, but the prosecution soon found itself bogged down in the finer point of international law. Trinidad had been a Spanish possession administered according to Spanish law, and Picton was able to demonstrate that when appointed he had been instructed to continue applying Spanish rather than English law. Since Spanish law permitted torture, this looked like a solid defence against some of the charges. He also invoked military law and claimed that because he was operating at a time of war, summary executions were a regrettable necessity. The only charge which was proceeded with in the end was that he had ordered the torture of a girl called Louisa Calderon, who was suspected of complicity in the theft of £500. Louisa Calderon had, at the age of 11, become the mistress of a man called Pedro Ruiz. It's possible she took another lover a short time later, a man called Carlo Gonzalez. That's what Ruiz believed, and perhaps in the spirit of revenge, He then made a formal accusation to the authorities claiming that Gonzalez and Calderon had conspired together and stolen £500 from his shop. The theft of such a large sum of money was a capital offence, meaning that anybody convicted of it would face the gallows. Neither Carlos Gonzalez nor Louisa Calderon, though, would admit to have anything to do with it, and so Calderon was brought before the governor of Trinidad, Thomas Picton himself. He questioned her, but she still refused to confess. Picton had her sent to the island's chief magistrate, who was by way of being a close friend of his. Together with Gonzalez, though, she stubbornly maintained that they were both innocent. When the jailer sent word to Picton asking what should be done to the young girl, Calderon was at the most 14 years of age at this time, and possibly 13. Picton ordered her to be tortured. Her right hand was bound to her left foot, and she was hoisted into the air by a rope tied around her left wrist. The only support provided for her right foot was a pointed wooden stake. The strain of being suspended in this way by one wrist was terrific, and any attempt to alleviate the discomfort meant trying to support the weight of the body on the sharp stake. It was a fiendish torment which Louisa Calderon was compelled to undergo for an hour. She was subjected to it once more the following day. In the end, no charge was ever brought against her, and she was not even brought before a court. It was this case which captivated London in 1806 when Thomas Picton was brought to trial. The case of the tortured teenage girl captivated London, and people illustrating popular newspapers vied with each other to see who could provide the most titillating images of the young girl's suffering. She was brought to London to give evidence and became a celebrity overnight. The fact that she was attractive and personable didn't help Picton at his trial. He was convicted, but immediately appealed, pending which he was again released on bail. The end of the affair will probably surprise nobody. The verdict was reversed and Picton was set free. He later died during the Battle of Waterloo, leading his men into action. I have to say that the idea of this man being celebrated publicly on the plinth of a statue, a man who was burning people to death as late as the 19th century, does rather stick in my throat. I'm not saying that I think that this statue should be scrapped, but I don't think it would be a particularly bad idea if a panel were added to provide what they now call context, that is to say, explaining what a terrible, truly terrible man Picton was. By the by, you can probably see a photograph of me in the background, which must look like an awful act of vanity. The truth is, it's a picture of me up on the Migdal David in Jerusalem, in the old city, and my wife took it, told me to turn round. I'm not much of one for photographs. And then she had it enlarged and gave it to me for Christmas. It's not that I'm in the habit of decorating my home with enlarged photographs of myself. I'm not that good looking for that to be effective. But anyway, as I say, that's me overlooking Jerusalem.